Throughout my journey, I've heard a lot of prophecies. I've heard a lot of messages. I've heard a lot of doctrines. I've heard a lot of teachings. I've listened to a lot of perspectives. And due to that, I'd like to make an address concerning a certain area of that. Um, Before I do, if you'd like to continue to connect with what I got going on and the rest of the community that is Cave of Mystery, link to the Discords in the description down below, as well as the link to the Patreon with all of my other content. Now, continuing with what I want to talk about today, the concept of the anomaly. I remember years ago, a man of God, I'm still friends with him. Um, I remember this certain man of God, first time we met, um, he asked me to kind of describe some of what I had been experiencing. And he looked to the other gentleman in the room and said, God told me that this type of anomaly would start occurring. And that became a word that I've fallen in love with. Just simply something that is unordinary, something that is unprecedented, something that there may not be code for. um, Something that breaks the idea, that destroys the preconceived notions of how reality is supposed to function. And I don't believe I'm the only anomaly, far from it. I believe there's a ton of people, and I have a lot of compassion for them. I remember back in a time when I thought that I was alone, where I thought that I was the only one encountering God in the capacity that I was. I knew that I wasn't. I was just not around anyone similar to myself. And I would often pray and ask God, I would pray for the people like myself, those who were encountering God genuinely, who were being rejected by the systems around them. Those people who were muffling themselves to fit in because they know that what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, contradicts the system that has a lot of people they love in. Uh, so I mentioned prophecies. A common prophecy that I've heard in many different formats is that we're on the cusp of something new. Things are about to begin to happen that have never been seen before. There's a new breed of people, a race of mystics, a race of sons, a new age of prophets, all types of things that fit into that category, that this new type of person is arriving on the scene, and they're unlike anything that the traditional world has ever experienced. Even down by saying that it'll be so large at one point that the generation can be marked by it, to the point where I've heard some refer to it as a nameless, faceless generation. And that is absolutely true. I believe in that. I agree with that we are on the cusp of some fantastic things that are unfolding. I do not have a negative eschatology. I don't see a negative future. I only see things getting better. Now, I do understand that in some capacity, some things have to crumble and some systems have to fall for better to fully express itself. But I wouldn't label the entire future negative just because I'm aware of a few key events. And I've heard people say things are like, this group is going to be like this. They're not going to be like this. They don't want to submit to that. They're not going to do in positive light in preparation for this group. And what saddens me is that I've noticed that when presented with that prototype, that type of person, that the same people who prophesy that something unprecedented is coming will then try to demonize, criticize, and then box in this new thing. And I'm not just speaking on behalf of myself. I can handle myself. I actually am not as bothered by some of my previous experiences as some may think. I'm not led by any past trauma or anything like that. I am aware that it's happening to other people who may not have the mental fortitude that I do. In that, oftentimes when presented with something new, people will either reject it or embrace it. Sadly, a lot of people who are forerunners right now, who are supposed to be helping to shift the consciousness of humanity in this day to transition into the blueprint that God really has for us, are stuck. They're silenced, they're stuck, they're submitted, they're blinded to old systems because that's what they believe they have to go through. Because sadly, many leaders, though they may possess the Holy Spirit, though they may flow with the Spirit, though they may have genuine conversations and some deal of relationship with God, oftentimes when it comes to leadership, they'll typically choose their system over God's will, in the sense that they have an idea, they have a blueprint, they have a frame of how things are supposed to go. And they've decided, and they have only allowed God to function with them insofar as God is serving that vision and that blueprint. So it's enough of God to say that God's working with us, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything that's happening is also God's will. That would be the deception. So when dealing with a lot of ministries, when dealing with a lot of groups, for someone who is immature, as I once was in this, I've gained a lot more confidence as my relationship with God has continued, and I've made bold steps to break away from things that I knew God didn't want me a part of. See, I understand other people haven't necessarily made that leap yet. And sadly, they'll find themselves stuck in a system, serving a religion, serving a tradition, serving men and women of God that are benefiting them, but are not actually helping them terraform reality, not helping them bring heaven to earth, to transform earth into heaven. As for many reasons, it's really that immaturity. And I'm not saying immaturity to be rude, that's literally what that state is called. Where in this moment, I'm vulnerable. I know that I'm called to something great. I don't necessarily know what it is yet. I haven't quite found my footing. I know I'm called to something. And sometimes leaders can recognize that you're called to something big, and they don't necessarily know what to do with you, so they give you the best thing that they know, which is dangerous if an individual hasn't been taught to hear and trust and obey the audible voice of God for themselves. Many systems, and I can speak for Christianity because I used to be a part of it, it suffers from the man of God syndrome. And my family, I call him my grandpa, Apostle Vincent, has a great way that he presents that structure, in that the founder of it was Moses, where God came down and descended on the mountain and invited all the people of God to come and fellowship with him. They were so terrified of him that they only sent Moses and said, in his words, "All right, Moses, how about this? You go up and meet with God and hear from God, and when you come back, we'll hear from you." That began this man of God syndrome that many of us still suffer from today. The invitation was released to everyone to come up and visit, come up and hear, come up and see for yourself. But due to fear, and now indoctrination, we believe that there are chosen individuals that meet with God, and we have to wait for those individuals to share their secrets with the masses. At the very least, I'll tell you that's not true, and everyone has the same access, to the point where everyone can meet with God. Everyone can hear from God. Everyone can see God should they so choose to. That same invitation is still available now. That's what I've been teaching for the last several years, is to see and hear God, to trust God fully. Now back to the system, right? That man of God syndrome. It puts you in a place where you're not trusting your own intuition, which is fine to some extent. You're not thinking, which I don't ever think is good. You're allowing someone else to think for you. And the saddest of them all, you've put someone or a system in between you and God, to where the things that you release or the things that you're hearing now have to be filtered through the possibility of someone else's ability to hear. That was something that I struggled with a lot. It was painful for me, and I never wish for anyone else to experience that. Is very clearly hearing God and having to wait for the leader that would be the man or woman of God to catch up, because they're serving a system and only allowing God to input to a certain capacity, where it's a rough experience to hear more than your leader. And I don't say that arrogantly, it was genuine. And honestly, something I can say is that my former pastor understood this and did a healthy thing. I respect him for this to this day. When I started having encounters, when I was hearing the voice of God, I wasn't yet seeing, but he knew that what I was experiencing was real. I would come and ask him questions, and I tried that mentor, spiritual father thing, and it never worked. I would come to him, I tried to serve, I tried to do this. All the things that Christianity taught was mandatory. I tried all that. And every time my pastor really just landed on the idea of, I know you're hearing from God directly. And since you're hearing from God, continue to hear from God and obey God. I ain't got much for you. He just backed up. He said, if you're hearing from God, what business do I have in the middle of that? And let me be. And he did give guidance where guidance was needed in some places. But for the most part, he gave me the freedom in a state when I was vulnerable and immature. He gave me the freedom to learn, grow, and develop that trust with God on my own. And sadly, most other systems within Christianity aren't teaching that. It's trust your interpretation of the Bible, which is still different than trusting the audible voice of God. Because that's a certain level of fear that comes with that system for two reasons. Either reason is still fear, but one of those reasons is that they're afraid of you being deceived, following something that's not God. The other is that they're afraid that you'll actually talk to God and God will call you away from what they got going on. Like I said, they're both fear. The voice of God is very distinct. Anyone who wants to learn it can. To a certain extent, it's a practice. I have videos on learning the voice of God. But when you're dealing with a system that you're submitted to like that, there's all of these barriers in place where you literally have to fight the foundation that people don't necessarily know that they're serving. They're plumb lines, as they call it, in order to obey the God that they claim to be obeying. It's not the battle of, I think I heard, I feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. It's like, no, me and God had a very literal conversation. This is what I know that I'm supposed to be doing. There is no doubt whatsoever. There is no room for doubt in this scenario. Yet, I'm battling against their system that they're serving. Which is why, before people have asked me, separate topic, but similar concept, people have often asked me what's my take on, like, Islam. Like, back when I was a Christian, or people who still think I'm a Christian, as a part of, like, do you believe that the Muslims and the Christians and the Jews have the same God? And my current response is, yeah. Their God is their religion. So yeah, religion is their God. The religion itself is their God. That's what they're serving. I've spent enough time with the real God and people who also spend time with the real God understand that his government is very different from any of the religious systems on the planet. None represent very well at all. There are organizations, there are structures that that use the branding a bit more, but as far as the application, the structure, the usage, the function, there isn't one organization that I could point to and say that they've got it. And that's off of very direct encounters that I've been having over the last several years, which many other people who've been in the same realms and dimensions that have also encountered the same thing. So it's using God as my plumb line because God's alive and living and has no problem interacting. So consider this a message for all of you who might find yourself currently stuck in a system that, well, you might have just found out that your God is the religion or your God is the system. It's okay. I always encourage people to pursue the conversation with God. Don't take my word for it. Don't even let this video be your God, because God's alive and talks back. But use this video as encouragement for some of you who may find yourself in that situation. That no, you're not a bastard if you don't have some other man or woman of God over you, lording over you, showing you the ropes. The kingdom of God has really good mentors. You're not, you don't have a lack of accountability because you don't have a pastor or anything like that. That's why I respect Prophet Tiffany Montgomery for her recent messages, because that's a sacred cow for many. That's a that's an area of controversy for many. The idea that you have to serve in order to lead, and you have to be under someone. Some human has to be over you. You have to have a spiritual father in the natural in order to have any legitimacy in the spirit. Reality, God the Father is a wonderful spiritual father. Yeah, I won't even tear into the coverings thing too much because that's not really my point for this video or for this message. It's just that be aware, right? Things are happening which may be unfamiliar to you. People are emerging that may be unfamiliar to you. Ask God. God talks back. Don't ask your theology. Don't ask your doctorate of divinity. Don't ask your years of experience in ministry. Don't ask your interpretation of the Bible or other sacred texts. Just ask God what you're dealing with, so that you know how to properly manage what's happening. I'll always repeat this sentiment, and it's that the number one enemy to the new move of God is always the last move of God. That's because they can't discern when God is doing something different. Or they're so committed to where God was that they can't embrace what God is doing now. That's part of the Hebraic philosophy, if I dare to call it that, is to continuously follow and move as God moves, not stay where God was. That's why when they were Hebrews, they pitched tents. They were nomads. It wasn't until they started to fall away from their roots that they started to build civilizations, which crumbled and crumbled and crumbled because when God left, they lost the ability to move where God was going. So many different types of people might find this video. Find your encouragement wherever it may be. But if there's anything I can encourage you in, it's that God talks back. God can be trusted. You're not going to be led astray by trusting God. God is a better leader than your pastor, your apostle, or whoever your mentors may be. He's a better guru than your guru. God talks back. Yeah, and I'll do another message on really detailing the structure of God's government. I feel like that's more appropriate for a different video. But please leave comments down below. Again, links are in the description to Patreon, where all of my other content is, my book, which if you're looking for something to really help you, this really goes, my book really deals with this time period, spirituality for now. It's the perfect guide for this day and age, and functioning where the kingdom is currently, insofar as I had revelation when I published it. The Discord is just where the community is. If you're looking for people who may be like-minded, we don't debate, but we do have meaningful conversations. We pick each other's mind. We encourage each other. See for yourself. But leave comments down below. Join us where you want to join us. And I guess that's it for this session. Later.